Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. This is going to be my wrap up. I think it probably will be fairly late just because of like various tech related, I guess not problems, but like things I gotta solve. I hope you like my t-shirt and my black lipstick. Yeah, I'm just going to talk to you about the books I read in October. This month I really feel like I was kind of almost getting back into my groove with reading, and then I think something that has changed for me recently in terms of grief, I guess, is just like I've lost a bit of my consistency. So like I can read but then like I just sort of stop for weeks, and I don't really like that, but I definitely have read a bunch of things and that's nice. So getting distracted by my lipstick. The first thing that I read was The Magicians of Caprona by Diana Wynne Jones, which is I think maybe like the third or the fourth book in the Chrestomanci series. It's after Conrad's Fate, which I read last in September 4th, and this one was just actually deeply enjoyable, whereas Conrad's Fate was fine, like it was enjoyable, but this one I actually just genuinely was like, this is a really charming and great children's book. I think it's got like a really wonderful setting. It kind of made me want to like write fan fiction using the setting, just because it's lovely. So in this kind of world, I almost said the Discworld, but that is not the right one. Also, does anybody watch What We Do in the Shadows? Because there was a reference to Discworld in it, which I thought was fun. But anyway, or maybe it's not a reference to Discworld and he just took that from... I think it is a reference to Discworld. I don't know. Anyway. Back on track. Yeah, so in this world that it's set, Italy isn't a unified country. It's set into different like city-states, which is also just kind of fascinating, although it's not particularly extensively explored. It's more like in the background of this story. And then it's set in Caprona, and it's about these two families, the Montana family and the Patrocchis, and they're two magician families, households, alike in dignity, and they are very antagonistic to each other, but it's like their magic that kind of created Caprona as a city. Their magic is like slowly ebbing away from them. So yeah, it's about that, and it's about their family, and then it follows this boy called Tonino, like he's the main character. Yeah, like I don't really know if I want to say more than that. But obviously from that description you can like get the vibes, like it's somewhat of a Romeo and Juliet, not really retelling, but a kind of like fun replay, rewind, and there's definitely lots of references to it. Tonino is a different entry point into the story, so yeah, but it's just a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it, so I'm glad I finally did. So then I read, or well, I finished actually, Shana Jackson's High Rise Mystery, which is a kind of kids book murder mystery series. So I did start reading this months and months ago, and I think, you know, partially it kind of suffered from that, but then I didn't really want to like go back and read the whole thing from the beginning, so I didn't. It's about these sisters, Nick and Norva, who find a dead body on their council estate, and then they try to like solve the murder of who did it. And it is fun. I'd say it's generally written for like a younger audience than the Murder Most Unladylike series, which is sort of what like led me to it, because I was like looking for kind of similar-ish things at one point. I guess it's just a bit simpler in how it's written. It's a contemporary story, so obviously that's also different, but they take these like Word docs and you get them, and then they make like timetables. So I think it would be fun to read if you're a kid, and there's also like lists that they do. It's in first person from Nick's perspective, and I really like her perspective. I think she's quite like neurodivergent, either coded or specifically because of the way like she approaches the world and kind of like thinks through the problem of solving the murder. So I like that. So the next book I read was actually a book that came out this month, or in October, which is exciting, and that's this wonderful book, Deep Wheel Orcadia, which is a novel by Harry Josephine Giles. This is a sci-fi poetry novel written in the, sorry, it's just quite shiny and beautiful, written in the Orkney dialect. And on the back it says it's a magical first, a science fiction verse novel written in the Orkney dialect. This unique adventure in minority language poetry comes with a parallel translation into playful and vivid English, so the reader will miss no nuance of the original. Interesting. I think that the blurb on the back is, I don't know, I don't necessarily think that's what Harry Josephine Giles is trying to do, but anyway. So yeah, this is beautiful poetry. I don't speak the Orkney dialect. Like, I have read some books with like some Scots dialogue in it, like the Quarry Road, you know, and sometimes it's kind of like fairly easy to like muddle along with it and like know kind of what's going on, and sometimes it's obviously not, because there are just words that like don't kind of more easily track take on to English words. And Scots and the Orkney dialect specifically is obviously like a minority language. It's like minoritized by English and England too, obviously. But I, you know, I want it also to some degree by like capital S Scotland too. But anyway, so what's cool about this is that there's the poem in Orkney and then there's English prose translation, and it's in smaller font. Like, it is all kind of minoritized within the book, which is I think part of what Harry Josephine Giles is like trying to do, or maybe not minoritize English, but try to stop it from inadvertently becoming the big language. So it's a really interesting book from a linguistic and from like a socio like literary kind of perspective too. And then it's also really interesting because it's a sci-fi novel set in this like extreme out of space on this like a space station place there, and there's people who kind of go out in spaceships looking for light and energy, and there's also kind of like a love story between Astrid, who's just come home from going to like art school on Mars, and somebody who's coming to visit called Darling, and they sort of strike up some kind of a relationship. It's just like this wonderful story. I guess saying cerebral makes it sound like, I don't know, some kind of like pretentiousness or something, but I don't mean that. I just mean like it's just very meaningful. I think it's very full of lots of things going on at once, and lots of ways of wording and being and loving. I guess it is kind of centrally interested in what a home is made of. Like I said, I don't speak the language it's written in, and I also tried to kind of keep the minoritized English at bay as well when I was reading it. So I read out loud the poems, and then I read in my head just the like English translation after I had read the poems, and that was like an interesting process for me as well, just in terms of kind of like understanding, I guess, because I think you definitely can like grasp a lot of the meaning, especially when you like sound the words out without necessarily needing like a direct translation. Language doesn't automatically translate to other language, especially I guess languages that are like inflected very specifically by place and by the relationship of, so like encounters and like colonization from like Norse areas, which is what has happened with Orkney, because I don't think this is what it is anymore, but it was like Orkney Norn, which had like a lot of Norse words, and now it's Orkney dialect. That might not be right, but I will actually link some stuff that Harry Josephine Giles said on Twitter, because she made like some tweets about like the history of sci-fi and Scots and stuff like that, and then also the Orkney language as well. But anyway, completely lost what I was saying. Oh yeah, so yeah, like I said, you can't like just direct translate from one thing to another generally, right? Like maybe with some words, but not with everything. And so in the English, there are these words that are they compound words? Are they portmanteau? I can't remember. They're one of those two, and they are just like, so in here we've got they gulp, catch, swallow, or let's find a fun one. Specific, strange, or strange, special, or gift, remembrance, memory, or few, small grain, or power, worth, attention, or wisdom, knowledge, news. This poem has a lot of them. Remember, know, reflect, willing. You know, so they're really interesting as well to encounter it. So there we go. That's cool. It's a really wonderful book. I would really recommend it. Josie Giles is like amazing, and I would just really love like the work they do, and I love like reading her thoughts and her work. In fact, actually, she also wrote Wages for Transition, which is like an incredible, just incredible. I would really recommend it, especially if you're interested in like wages for housework stuff and kind of like, yeah, Marxist feminist, gendered labour, blah. Wages for Transition is like so good. In fact, I want to reread it, and I also now want to reread this, so go me. The next book I read was also actually like a Scottish book, and that is Amphibian by Christina Newworth, which is just a small book. And I actually saw it with Travels in Fiction, I think is the name of her channel, like a while ago, and I was like, oh, that looks like a fun book. I mean, it's fun, and the premise is like one day Rose goes to her workplace and it's like slowly being flooded. So it's set in Edinburgh, and it mentions, you know, stuff where I live, which is kind of always fun to read about, like very directly. And yeah, it's just this kind of like absurd capitalist story. The company that Rose works for is called Moneytown Cash Growth. It's just very silly and kind of ridiculous, and you know, there's like an octopus at one point, and like people have to like be weighted down so they don't just float up as the water increases, to try and get them to be more productive, but like does flooding an office really help with that? So yeah, it's just this like fun little book. The reason I actually ended up picking up is because I went to a charity shop to drop off some books, and obviously I looked at the books there and I found this, and it was signed, and then there's a cute octopus drawing, which like, it's really cute. So obviously I was like, oh well, I have to get that and read it. The next book I read was for Victober, and it was Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. I loved it a lot. I think it's a very sexy book. It seems like a lot of people agree with me because when I wrote that on Goodreads, like loads of people liked my post. I also wrote like, if you're a sheep farmer called Gabriel, don't hesitate to contact me, so that offer is also still out there. So this is my third Thomas Hardy book. I think like there's ways that I knew that I wouldn't, like I don't really have time for some of the comments that like are in the book about like what women are and blah blah blah, but like, for me they weren't like very many or enough to like really put me off. And what I'm trying to say is that like I think me and Thomas Hardy, we share like a vibe, you know? I feel like I said that the last time I spoke about a Thomas Hardy book, which is like, does anybody know what I mean? But I just found with this one, I did really enjoy The Return of the Native, and I enjoyed Two on a Tower less than that one, but it was still fine, and it still did make me cry. Whereas this one was just really right in my heart, and I really loved it. So basically the story is about Bathsheba Everdeen, and we begin with Gabriel Oak, who's this sheep farmer, and it's kind of about Bathsheba growing up. I just want to call her Katniss because her last name is Everdeen. Bathsheba like growing up and growing into money, and kind of like the interactions then between Gabriel and then like two other kind of men who come into her life and try to like, I guess, be with her, court her. One of the things I loved about this book is actually how it described time and how it described, because one of the reasons why I fell in love with Gabriel is because of the way that he's just extremely constant, but not in a kind of like he's literally just always there, he's always the same, but rather like the way he's constantly present in a responsive way. It's like very seasonal. Obviously like farming work is like a seasonal long-term project, and I feel like Gabriel's commitment to that project and to like caring for the sheep, but also just the farm in general, and like when he first arrives at Bathsheba's farm, like, well, he saves her produce, I can't remember what it is, like grain and things like that, from a fire. And there's other times when he basically saves them from like rain, which would like flood and make them moldy. So he's just always the kind of like temperate medium, the temperate savior. I don't know, like that makes it sound like he's this like egotistical like angel, which I don't think he is either. And I like those bits when he gets kind of frustrated and angry with Bathsheba. I think there's also like a way that like it's about his capacity with his hands and the way he cares for the sheep. So I also rewatched the film as well, actually, like the one with Carey Mulligan, and I had watched it before, so I did know like the story as well going into this read. First time I watched the film, I really liked the film. After reading it and then watching the film, I did not like the film half as much, and I felt like they did a kind of fairly superficial job of like transposing the characters into it. And I do think it's partially because Gabriel doesn't actually, like as a character, he's quite hard to characterize in a film, because like we get his like interiority in a way that obviously like in a film you can't really do. It is a fine adaptation and I like the clothing in it. Actually no, wait, one more thing as well, because I do think that like they cut out a lot of like really key scenes in the book. So like they cut out parts of Troy and Fanny's like marriage ceremony, and they cut out like a bunch of other stuff that I felt were like actually really important and integral to like the story and the characters, and then also the way that like time is being represented. There's this incredible quote in it that is about just like how in the country, like, or like in this area where people are living, time hasn't really gone on in the way that it goes on in like city spaces. Like the present is the future and the past is just the present, basically. It's written very beautifully and I just completely butchers it, but I don't know, maybe if you've read it you'll know which passage I'm talking about. But yeah, I just thought that was really beautiful. Well, so anyway, waffled on about that. There's just two more to go. So this is Tangleweed and Brine by Deirdre Sullivan, which is a collection of fairy tale retellings, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 13 tales, and I would say most of them are of like pretty well known fairy stories, but there are a couple that are slightly less known. I was kind of underwhelmed by this collection. I thought I would enjoy it much more than I did, and I think that part of it is that there's like a fairly repetitive writing style for most of the stories, and it's in the second person, and after a while I was just deeply bored by that, and I also was like, what is the point of it? Like, why are you writing in this way? Because the stories are, you know, short, so like there's quite a lot of space to like experiment with, because you don't have to sustain it for a novel length piece. So that's why I was like interested in the second person, but like it didn't work. Like it didn't give very much at all to what the stories were saying. There are some like illustrations alongside the stories, and I like them to some degree. I think some are better than others. So there's one story that is the Rumpelstiltskin story, and in it, well, this is the picture for the story, and I zoomed in on that place because Rumpelstiltskin wants to eat the babies, and then the person who did the illustration has drawn the Rumpelstiltskin character with like a long nose and kind of like classically witchy features, which like is anti-Semitic, especially doubled by the fact that they're like Rumpelstiltskin wants to eat babies, so that's just like blood libel basically. So I felt like that wasn't great, and maybe should have been like thought about with more sensitivity when you're retelling the story, and you don't need to reproduce anti-Semitic caricatures. And you know, I don't think this affected like the rest of the stories, like it's not like I noticed it in others. I mean, maybe it is there and I didn't notice. I think part of it is that it does feel quite like maybe a bit surface level about how it's trying to be kind of feminist, but at the same time I do think that like I've just kind of like moved on from when I was like really interested in fairy tale retellings. They just don't interest me in the same way. I also feel like there is a way that there's just no space for you if you're fat in a fairy tale, including feminist ones, and I think that that is also why maybe I've just turned away from it, because it's like hard to be like just fundamentally excluded from the kind of visual and literary vocabulary that you're trying to build up for yourself, if that makes sense. I definitely liked You Shall Not Suffer, which was Hansel and Gretel, but it was retold from the perspective of the witch. I liked that a lot, and there was like transformation stuff and also baking, which like loved it. And that one actually did include like, I guess, kind of fatness as well, if I remember. There's only one queer story in this, and that's The Little Gift. And I did like that to begin with, but then I didn't like it when it ended. And I think I kind of like Beauty and the Board. I thought that was kind of a fun retelling as well. There is one specific retelling called Riverbed, which is a retelling of Donkey Skin, which immediately, if you know that story, you'll know what it's going to be about. But if you don't, it's a really, really awful story with incest. There's no warning about that. It's just, and I did know the story before I went in, but it is still like extremely upsetting. So just like a heads up in case you encountered that story or this collection. Then the last book that I read for this month was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and also, you know, that was for Victober. First, I want to talk about like my history with it, I guess, which is that when I was maybe like 15, 14, I started reading Wuthering Heights, and I think I read probably like one volume of it or so, something like that. I definitely read like a chunk of it, and I do remember parts of like Cathy and Heathcliff's childhood, and I kind of stopped reading because I just got so frustrated with Joseph. I just was like so bored by what he said. He just kept going on, and it was really hard for me to read and like comprehend what he was saying. This time I read the audiobook because I don't have a physical copy with me, but I do have this mug, which is what I'm using to represent the book, and so I think that helped with the Joseph part. The one thing I would say about the book is I do think that Joseph should have just been edited down because he's irrelevant. He doesn't really do anything with the plot, but he's just like always talking and being unbearable. Anyway, so yeah, that's the context. Like I had read some of it, but then I also did know the story because me and my best friend at school, we did this project where we watched like a bunch of different versions of it, so I had seen like the conclusion of the story. Let's pretend everything is the same as it was before, because I had to stop recording this and then record on like a very not the same day. I feel like I've lost my like brain. I guess we'll start with the fact that I enjoyed this book, or I love this book, or you know, it's kind of appalling, but in a way that like just surrounds you and is kind of just fascinating. When I first read it, I had one of the lines just completely stuck in my head since I was 15, you know, and I feel like the same kind of experience happened with me for the rest of the book, where these lines just like rebound around my head, and when I was trying to sleep I would just have it ricocheting around me, and it's incredible, you know. It's this tale of obsession and of revenge and love. It kind of speaks, I guess, to a lot of the like the violence that we inflict upon each other. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't necessarily need to say what the plot is about. I feel like everybody knows it, but I do think that it is quite important. It's not just the beginning part of the book that people realise is Wuthering Heights, like it's also this like doubled story, this like, what's it called when is it like a chiasmus, when it's like repeated, like, I don't know. Anyway, and yeah, I like that a lot, and I love Hareton actually like quite a lot. I think he's really lovely. I think it's quite nice as well when like you get to really see characters change. The thing that was like rebounding in my head since I was 15 and read it first was the line, "If all else perished and he remained, I would still continue to be." That line just like kind of, I guess it just speaks really, it speaks to me and my soul, and to, you know, to some of the relationships that sustain and care for me, specifically one, I guess. And I think it's just like sort of incredibly beautiful and incredibly moving. And I guess something I love about the book as a whole, and even though it is full of, again, like appalling violence, is the way that it is so alive. Like that's what like captures me there. That's what like keeps me reading, and it also is what makes me feel some sympathy towards the characters, even though a lot of them are awful. Yeah, I watched like a film adaptation, like the 2011 one, after I'd read the book, because that one I hadn't seen, and I hated it. But like, it's one of the only, as far as I'm aware, one of the only adaptations that casts Heathcliff as a person of colour, which textually, like, it's very clear that he's not a white person. People use slurs against him, and so like some of the racism that he experiences is depicted. So I think like reading the book closely enough, although it doesn't take that much close reading, but whatever, to, you know, actually see that Heathcliff isn't like a broody white man is good. Specifically, they use like the G slur towards him generally, but the thing about like sort of unproblematically casting him as a person of colour is that like, it's not only that like he experiences racism textually, but it's also like a really racist depiction, because he's represented as the most like disassembling, revengeful, greedy, tyrannical, awful person. And I mean, you know, obviously, like I said before, like something that's kind of incredible about the book is that like you still do manage to feel for him, and like I cried when things weren't going his way, even though like he is awful and he says absolutely appalling things, and does appalling things too, not just says them. But yeah, so it's not like a wholesale like, oh, this is good representation from Emily Bronte. It's like, this is complicated. Anyway, but like the 2011 film is awful. I mean, Kathy has no character whatsoever. They don't even include the like second part of the story, and it's supposedly sort of more from Heathcliff's side, which means you don't get like a lot of the like incredible lines, such as if all else perished and he remained, but also it doesn't even really give his perspective either. I'm trying to think of what else I told my friend Jess when I was talking with her about it. There's something kind of satisfying about the way it is so kind of villainous and violent. It sort of like responds to a maybe particular kind of loneliness, a particular kind of like frustration and anger at the world. I said this in my like very brief Goodreads like comments, but I guess like I do feel like it's like a kind of scar of a book, in the sense of like reading the book it is itself a wound, but also that it leaves you scarred after you've read it, because you can't help but be marked by it in some way, or you can't help but ingest part of it. I do think like the loneliness thing is maybe important. Like I do feel like maybe that's also why I particularly so enthralling to read, because it's so like visceral and so emotive. I don't know, the sort of melodrama of the book as well is kind of incredible. There's like a scene where it's described that you can hear like Kathy's blood beating in the room, which like is kind of astounding for how loud that must have been. I mean, I realise it's sort of like sensationalist and maybe not supposed to be kind of taken literally, but at the same time, like that's what makes the energy of the book so incredible, is that like everything is kind of taken so literally, and like Kathy literally does haunt Heathcliff, and like, I don't know, yeah. I think that's the part that's really sexy to me, to be honest. Yeah, not that I found the book sexy, because I mean, it's just awful, and like it's really just very, very intensely about kind of domestic abuse, domestic violence, in a really like direct and awful way. It's also kind of interesting to have read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall this year, which is almost kind of like the opposite side to the coin of this book. In a way, it's quite like a sort of slow, I can't think of the right word, but like it's like a moderate, I think is what I'm looking for, like a moderated story. Like, it's also like an intense story and there is emotion in it. That's not to say there isn't, but not to the degree of Wuthering Heights, whereas like Wuthering Heights is like the opposite direction. It's like way up, and this one is kind of tamping it down. But they are both about domestic abuse, and they are both also about like alcohol addiction, that kind of thing too. Incredible book. Really glad to have like finally kind of read it, and I'm sure I'll be rereading it more in the future. When I did first read it, because I stopped partway through and because I hated Joseph so much, I think I gave it like 3 stars, which is kind of hilarious to me. I guess like the reason I like Hatton as well is that he really speaks to like the way that we can be redeemed, I guess. He doesn't really do much in a way, but I guess it's just that like it's nice to know that there is hope. This is a lot, but like thinking about the family as this place of violence, which is what I do, I guess. It's nice that somebody within a family can still heal and can still have like a happy ending, I guess, even in the face of such violence. It's also like, why do the Brontes like love their like random, boring, completely unimportant men frame narrators, when like with Gilbert in Tenant of Wildfell Hall, like it's mostly Helen's diaries, so it's actually directly her voice, but then we're getting it through him writing a letter. And then in this one we've got Mr. Lockwood, who's just completely inane and just ridiculous, but then it's mostly like Nellie's narrative, which also this time I thought that, whereas before I was like, oh, Emily wants us to really like Nellie and I guess just like unquestioningly take her narrative narrative into account. But this time I was like, I'm not sure if you are. Maybe she's supposed to be also representative of the way that like Heathcliff and Cathy were brought up in this like topsy-turvy world, because this particular like servant had too much power. This is all in quotation marks. Yeah, I wonder if that's sort of like part of why they're so like degraded and deranged and stuff, and it's all going wrong. I don't know. I'd love to hear what you think about that, and also the book in general, and also anything else I've mentioned in this video. If you are tall and from Yorkshire and you want to be my wife, let me know. I think that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Okay, bye!